Hello, I'm Anthony Mills, Executive Director of Global Innovation Institute, GINI. We're here today to have an author interview with one of the authors of a book that GINI has recently published called The Other Side of Growth. The Other Side of Growth, An Innovator's Responsibilities in an Emerging World, is a book that brings together 9 different authors to offer different perspectives, unique perspectives on the role that innovation plays in corporate growth and to introduce the reader to numerous questions that we as business leaders should be asking ourselves about how we leverage innovation and about the implications of the innovations we deliver for all of the different stakeholders involved. Um, Today, we're interviewing Dr. Bettina von Stamm. And Bettina is one of the authors of one of the chapters of the book. Her chapter was called The Dark Side of Innovation. Beware of the Dark Side of Innovation. So Bettina is the founder and director of the Innovation Leadership Forum. She works with leaders and leadership teams to give them the confidence to innovate and to collaborate in the 21st century. She delivers executive programs at prestigious universities and corporations around the world. And her most recent clients include 3M, Cambridge University, Dusto Business School, Glenn Dimplex, Ameris Carbon and Graphites, Sanofi Aventis, Siemens, and Steelcase. Following her deep conviction about the importance of sustainability as a key driver for innovation, Bettina also joined Caterva, a nonprofit whose mission is to identify, evaluate, and accelerate sustainable disruptive innovation. And she is the director of awards since the autumn of 2015. Bettina is also a fellow of the German-based Peter Perbilla Foundation, the UK-based Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures, and Commerce, and holds the position of visiting professor at Middlesex University. Her prolific writing includes 4 books and innumerable articles. Bettina holds an MBA as well as a PhD from London Business School, as well as a first degree in architecture and town planning. So with that, I'd like to welcome you, Bettina.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Great pleasure to be talking to you today.
It is likewise a pleasure to have you and to be able to discuss your chapter in the book. So let's start then with some questions about your chapter and have you speak to those questions. So in your chapter of this book, which is entitled Innovation, Beware of the Dark Side, you introduce us to the fact that innovation can have a so-called dark side, and that quite often the deep passion that highly innovative people have can blind them to that dark side. Tell us more what we mean about innovation having a dark side.
Well, I think it sort of occurred to me about 10 years ago when certainly here in the UK where I currently live, the hype about innovation was at its height. Everyone, oh, we must innovate, we must become more innovative. And I was getting a little bit worried because no one was asking why. Or actually, in fact, when I did pose that question to senior managers, they would look slightly puzzled at me, like, well, is that not what we meant to do? Why would we question that we have to innovate? And for me, that made me realize that there might be a dark side to it, because just doing something because everyone is doing it and not questioning why am I doing it and what's my purpose of innovating, what do I want to achieve by innovating? I just thought, well, hang on a second, there's always a flip side to the coin, and innovation is not the be all and end all. So we really need to challenge why we are innovating a little bit more.
Very good. So certainly there can be that dark side if we're not asking ourselves why we're doing it and looking at perhaps the bigger picture of that. You go on to introduce us to several ways in which innovation's dark side can manifest itself. The first of these is that innovation lacks a purpose. You state that you feel very strongly that innovation must have a purpose, and then when it comes to believing that innovation is the be-all and end-all, there has to be a firm but. So tell us more about what you mean here and why innovation having a purpose is so important to you.
Well, I just think one of the reasons is that if we're looking at the one and only planet that we have, there are sort of limited resources available to us. And just not ask ourselves on how we are using the resources, how we make best use of them, just because we can do something, we are doing it. For me is doubtful, and is certainly not, in my view, the best use of resources. So the question is really, unless I've got a purpose. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not that, I know that a lot of innovation happens when we are experimenting and exploring. That is okay, as long as I'm aware that that's why I'm doing it. So I think for me, this is the question of purpose is also connected to deliberately and consciously doing something. And I feel there is just too much headless chicken around who are just running around, not quite sure in which direction and why they are running in this direction or why they are running in that direction. So it is, this aspect of the dark side is really about inviting people to make conscious and deliberate choices when they are going to innovate, and to really ask, why am I actually doing this? Why am I spending my time? Why am I spending company resources in this experiment, in this exploration? So what is my aim with all of this?
Mm-hmm. And I think that, thinking in the large picture of things, some purposes might be more motivating than other purposes. So,
Yes.
yeah, you can elaborate on that if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, I think this is sort of deeply, for me, the purpose of innovation has to be tied very closely to the company's mission and to the company's strategy. For me, innovation is a tool to bring a company strategy to life. And so, yes, there are companies who've got the mission, beat our competitor. Well, I would like to question how motivating and how purposeful that really is. And I mean, interestingly, it sort of also ties into one of my other dark sides. But interestingly, the organizations who have a purpose that goes beyond making money, that has the purpose of benefit society and the environment in some kind of shape or form, they tend to actually outperform those organizations that have, beat the competitor kind of purpose statements or mission statements. Yeah. So it is, it is, you're absolutely right. It's not all similarly motivating. And in the context of innovation, what's particularly important is intrinsic motivation. Now, I always like to say, you can't people to tell, go innovate. Right? You can't dictate it or you can't demand it. The only way to get people to innovate is to inspire them. And so therefore that again ties in with the purpose. If it's sort of a meaningful purpose that generally goes beyond oneself, beyond the organization, takes a bigger picture into consideration, tends to be much more motivating than, go get our competitor.
Yeah, I would agree, Bettina. I think, the more that the purpose of your innovation ties to the mission of your organization, and the more the mission of your organization is truly altruistic for all of society and all of the stakeholders, absolutely that's going to tap into our own personal intrinsic motivations as human beings and really motivate us to innovate. So I think there's a major connection between those purposes and missions and our intrinsic motivations that make good innovation happen. Absolutely. So thank you for that insight. Another way you show us that innovation's dark side can manifest itself is what you call too much innovation. Talk to us about too much innovation. Why is too much such a bad thing?
Well, I just, again, sort of for me, a lot of it is tied back to making most of the resources that are available to us, given how many people are living on the planet and how many other beings would like to live on this planet as well, and we are taking their space away. So it is really, it's what I'd like to challenge is we have this culture of cramming as many features into products as ever possible, have new products coming out as quickly as possible. And I think I've written that we are creating 50 million tons of electronic waste every year. Yes. And to imagine that only a small percentage of that is going to be recycled. So we are having this culture of where everyone wants to have the latest and the newest. Just think about all the mobile phones. People buy a new one, and when they've bought it, they're already thinking about the next one. And that is not sustainable. That can't continue, especially if too many organizations continue design things in a way where you can't recycle, when something is disposed at the end of the not necessarily of its life cycle, but when people want to stop using it, which is entirely different. You can't recycle things and put them back into the cycle of production. And so therefore, I think, do we really need iteration after iteration after iteration? Do we really need, was it 24,000 or something like that? Yes, 24,000 different Android devices. Is that really necessary? And so again, I think a lot about the dark side of innovation is awareness, being aware, being deliberate, questioning, what is the benefit of having yet another iteration? Might it be better to wait a little bit and then introduce something where we can really make a difference, rather than just, all those little tiny tweaks.
And there certainly is this, direct connection between the push to deliver constant new innovation and, commercial consumerism. And it becomes addictive at some points, like you're sort of saying. It's almost addictive. As consumers, we tend to always want the newest and the latest and greatest. It's what actually one of the authors of a book called Neolatry, the idolatry of what's new. And, that drives, incessant commercialism. And is that really good for the planet? Is that really good for us and our future generations? And, I think, as you're alluding, sometimes the answer may be no. And so I think that's a very important perspective to think about. How do we balance, the need for businesses to deliver innovation with the need for society to be able to repurpose and recycle and reuse things and not have to constantly replace them and generate the level of waste that is generating, particularly with e-waste these days. So,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just also think, is it really, what is the benefit of always having the latest thing? So if you really challenge yourself, why do I want always the latest? What does it actually do for me? And does it make me really happy if I've got always the latest product? And what does it say about me? What makes me happy? If I need that external thing to get me excited about life and who I am, if it's not coming from the inside. But that's going at a quite deep philosophical level. Maybe we should move on to another aspect of the dark side.
Well, it certainly is, but it's true. I think every one of us as citizens of this planet have a responsibility to use wisdom in our use of commercial goods. I live in the United States, and I've heard it said that if everyone in the world strove to have the lifestyle that Americans have, there simply is not enough resources in the world to be able to sustain that. It's simply
actually. We need 4 planet Earth if everyone wanted to live like people in America. If everyone on this planet want to live like the Americans, we would now need 4 planet Earth, not the one that we have.
And so that simply is not realistic. So there is wisdom to be had there. So thank you for that insight. You also tell us that innovation that is released too soon is yet another way the dark side manifests itself. So can you give us some examples of innovation that were released too soon, and from those show us how that leads to certain bad outcomes?
Yes, I just think because we are so obsessed with speed, it's always get something out as quickly as possible and all the rest of it. And so we are putting things into the market before we actually fully understand the consequences, particularly the unintended or the negative consequences, because we are so intent on focusing what something can do for us, that we are not challenging or asking, what can go wrong. And I sometimes wonder whether the entire story around GM food was one where something was brought to the market too early before we really understood the consequences. I mean, we are pretending that we can create genetically modified products without any effect on the surrounding environment. But everything is part of a bigger system. And if you're putting GM modified crops into the ground, there is no way of guaranteeing, unless you do it in a controlled laboratory environment, there is no guarantee that that you can control where it does or doesn't go, whether birds pick it up or whether, whether the wind blows it away, so what I'm saying, and once it's out there, it's Pandora is out of the box. You can't get it back into the box. It's you can't, once something is invented in the public domain, and particularly in today's context with the internet, it's out there. You can't control it. You can't put it back. You can't uninvent something.
Yeah.
So therefore, again, sort of the invitation to really say, I'm wondering with the pandemic at the moment and the development of all the vaccines, being pushed out at breakneck speed. And while I completely understand why it is done, again, I wonder how often the question actually, what could potentially unintended consequences be?
So,
Again, sort of, is this being asked at all?
yeah, so I think that's certainly a wake-up call for us as business leaders, to always think about, have we properly vetted and validated our new innovations? Have we considered all of the possible implications for all the possible different stakeholders, and what could potentially go wrong? And then that's a challenging question, because the learning curve can be very difficult and long and time consuming and expensive. But that's certainly a question we should be looking at with things like GMO and medicines and other things that we engineer. Are the possible consequences that we aren't aware of and haven't considered? So absolutely.
Yes, and I think in this context, I also it is just the reaction to the pandemic is almost like a Pavlovian reaction. So there's a virus, let's develop a vaccine. There's another virus, let's develop. Instead of saying, well, hang on, what would happen if we'd step back and just ask the question, we're trying to fix the symptoms rather than looking at the underlying problems. Well, I think that's maybe not entirely fair, because of course, there are the questions around the wet markets and all such things. However, I think there could be a step further to say, why is it that we humans are not able to deal with those viruses in the first place? And I personally have a couple of ideas on why that might be, going from keeping our children in an environment that is as sterile as possible, so the children's immune system never have a chance to develop, to flourish and to build a proper immune system. I think it's not for nothing that we've seen huge immune system related illnesses, whether it's from asthma to all sorts of other illnesses that are related to our or to the vulnerability of our immune system. And just looking at the food that we eat, everything is created to look perfect and beautiful. And I think there's an EU regulation that if an apple has got not a certain shape, you can't call it an apple or something silly like that, right? So we are creating stuff that looks beautiful. And if you then look at the nutritional content of fruit and vegetables today, you will find it is a fraction of what they used to have 30 years ago, right? So, we are weakening we are not allowing our immune system to develop properly. We are not nourishing our body. That's why we take vitamin supplements and all that kind of stuff. But I wish there would be some people who look at that question. What is it that in the system that we have created that makes us more susceptible? And playing into that is the fact that those people who have underlying health condition, as is always pointed out, are much more susceptible to the virus than those who haven't. That for me is also an indication that there might be something, to asking this question.
Well, so yeah, it sounds like if nothing else, there's a whole lot of unasked questions that really our society would benefit from having asked about the bigger picture and scheme of things. Very good then. So another way you show us that innovation's dark side can be manifest is when, quote unquote, good innovation turns bad. So can you give us some examples of good innovations that have turned bad and what that ultimately meant for all the stakeholders involved?
Yes, well, I think I'd like to, I'm generally a cup half full rather than half empty person. And I'm generally inclined to give people the benefit of the doubt rather than see that, see people as mean and nasty and negative. So my base assumption is that those who are innovate are generally doing this with the best of intentions. So that is a starting point. The problem is then what often happens to that innovation once it's in the marketplace. And I mean, it starts with small little things. When cereals were introduced, the breakfast cereals were introduced, they really tended to be quite healthy until, all sorts of sugars and salts and flavorings and bits and pieces were added to it because it tastes nicer. But in a way, it loses some of the goodness, some of the healthiness that was originally, why it was originally developed. So that is one aspect of it. But for me, sort of a huge one is also that really got me going at some point in time is we are using solar energy as a way to alleviate the burden we are placing on our planet. Well, yes, it is to replace fossil fuels. That's the immediate thing, but the bigger picture is that we want to reduce the harm we are inflicting on our planet. Then I really don't know what to say anymore, almost, when I then see that forests are being cut down for the creation of solar plants. I see, I live a couple of hours north of London. When I take the train down to London, I see fields that are covered in solar panels. And I can see that, some people say, well, yes, but you can have sheep graze there. Well, there might be one or two where actually they use sheep to keep the grass down. In the other instances, they spray the fields in order to keep the vegetation down. And, my question is that, it doesn't make sense to me. You've got this good innovation that's supposed to be beneficial to the environment and mankind, and you're using it in a way that has got negative consequences. And so I can't remember, there was an article that I came across recently where I think it was in Asia somewhere, where they started to put solar panels over existing infrastructure. And I think, yes, exactly. This is what we need. If we want to maximize the benefit while minimizing the negative consequences, then, we just need to investigate where could we put the stuff where it does more good than harm. And given that we've got a road system that is covering up so much ground already, why not use that one? Why not build solar bridges across our infrastructure, our motorway or whatever infrastructure? Motorways are hugely wide traffic lanes, and so it might be a benefit for the drivers because they are not quite so exposed to the elements. It creates doesn't require any additional ground. However, what it does require, and why I also believe it makes it quite difficult, it requires collaboration. Because there are those who build the roads and they maintain the roads and whatever, then you come into conflict with who's responsible and owning stuff. And, so a lot of collaboration and mutual understanding is required if we want to make that work. And I think that is one of the reasons why it is quite difficult to create a win-win situation, amongst different players and make sure that only the positive sides of an innovation are being realized.
Yeah, so I think the takeaway for me there is, two things. Number one, that we really have to think broadly about how we deploy innovation, and are we deploying a good innovation in a way that maintains its goodness all the way around, or are we deploying it in a way that's going to create some sort of harm, like you talked about, mowing down forest and cutting out forest to put in the solar plant. So I think we have to really begin thinking far more holistically about how we deploy innovation, how innovation is used, so that we can ensure innovation remains good and is good in every facet and every aspect of its application. The second thing, you mentioned, I think you're totally right, collaboration. And I think that is a struggle, with government, public sector organizations, and sometimes when public sector has to work with private sector, and there's a drive now for more partnerships there, but that collaboration can become a stumbling stone, for some organizations. So I guess the point is we really have to put forth additional effort to really collaborate more effectively in coming up with the true win-wins around how we deploy innovation. So I totally agree. That's excellent point.
Yeah.
So,
And actually,
oh yeah,
yeah. So just building on that collaboration piece, and I think because on my own journey to understand and enable innovation, as I always describe it, um, I've come quite early around this issue of diversity. That on the one hand, without diversity, no innovation, and on the other hand, what we've just talked about, if you try to bring people with different mindsets from different backgrounds together, it can be really challenging. And when thinking about it, I also realized, well, these groups have different things that are meaningful and important to them. So some might have this big picture view, and the other one have a very detail focused view. So it's very difficult for them to communicate and deeply understanding each other. And then I think associated with these perspectives is a mindset in each of the groups that theirs is the one right way. This is the right way of doing things, or this is the right way of doing things. And the whole notion of best practice and all the rest of it really enforces this particular view that there is indeed one best way of doing it. And so then of course, if people deeply believe that there is one right way, then any alternative will be perceived as a criticism and as a challenge. And so therefore we shouldn't be surprised that that there is resistant if this group has one worldview and the other one's got a different one, and each believe they are right. Then of course there will be conflict. And so what I have come to propose is really that there is, whether something is right or wrong. Well, first of all, I don't like the terminology, and so what I tend to say is it is about finding what is most appropriate given a particular context and a particular point in time. And I think, even with best practice, what is often forgotten is the time element, because what's best practice yesterday is, no longer best practice today. Or, as I say, I'm not quite fond of best practice, because it, means everything else, it seems to indicate everything else is wrong. But, so I think if we can shift a mindset that understands that it is about appropriateness, not right or wrong, that I feel really alleviates some of the potential for conflict. Because we can both be right, depending on which context we are looking at.
That certainly makes sense. And in my experience, a really healthy organization is one that realizes what you're saying, that it's not what is the one right way, but what's the most appropriate given the context and the situation we're in. And a healthy organization is also one that really taps into diversity, so that they can have different perspectives and viewpoints, and they'll have a diverse group of people collaborate effectively together. And the healthy culture really substantiates that and supports it over the long run. So absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so the final way that you show us the innovation's dark side can be manifest is in the form of innovation that goes a step too far. Can you share us what you mean by that? Perhaps point us to some examples of it, and what happened when they did go a step too far.
Yes. Well, what I'm sometimes worried about is that this belief in innovation, not only innovation generally, but the slogan "technology will save us" seems to be very widely spread and very widely accepted. And I sometimes wonder whether, now we are becoming really philosophical, because it goes to the essence of what makes us human. What makes us unique, what makes us special. And I just feel that we are giving up more and more of our abilities, of our skills, of what I think makes us unique. We are handing over to technology to do for us. And in a lot of instances, it is probably wonderful because it makes life easier for us. Having a calculator is fantastic. I don't need to use my gray cells in order to do some calculations. But at the same time, we are just always seem to believe that technology is always right. And yet the number of times where in a restaurant or when shopping, I've done the math in my head and come to the till or pay the check and just went, hang on a second, something is not quite right. And lo and behold, the food from some other table has been added onto ours, or all sorts of things that, so, and if we just blindly trust that, not my favorite scenario. And I think the one which amuses as much as saddens me is the way people use satnav, so satellite navigation or any of these systems, and end up in all kinds of strange and funny places that they could have prevented if they were just vaguely aware of the four directions, north, south, east, west. If you want to go north and you're driving into the sun at lunchtime, there's a chance, at least when you're in the northern hemisphere, is that you're going the wrong way. And so if you know that you're when you booked your hotel, it said is 10 minutes from the airport and you're still driving after 1 hour, there might be an indication that you're not going to the right place. Right. And so this is what I mean, is our ability to think, to reflect, to challenge, all these things we are just giving away. You're saying, technology, you do it for me.
And I see a big risk with the technology now going where it is. I mean, we love the convenience it provides for us and the things it does for us, but I don't think we can ever stop using the gray matter between our ears as human beings. We have to continue to use our own cognitive abilities, our own common sense, and not become so dependent on the technology that we're not really thinking about what's happening, what's going on. And because if we do that, in my perspective, I think we cease to be human at that point. We're just dependent on machines.
Absolutely. And so from connected to that for me is the way we are educating. Mm-hmm. Because I fear that the way we are educating encourages our children to have limitless belief in technology. Mm-hmm. And that's what we are demonstrating to them with our own behavior. That technology will save us scenario again. And so I think if we want to maintain the ability to use our gray matter, we can't have multiple choice questions for our children throughout their education. And all the knowledge that we had to learn because it was only available in books via transmitted from our teachers to us, you just now go to Google and Google it. So it is that acquiring knowledge is not the problem or not the challenge. What is the challenge is to figure out which information to trust. To discern what is a credible source and what is not a credible source, and why is it credible or why is it not, so all these things that we are willingly give away, mm-hmm. By relying on all these other things is what we need most.
Yeah,
the critical, challenging, and questioning, and asking the questions rather than providing answers.
Yes, and as especially as innovators, but we would hope this for everyone, we can never stop using critical thinking skills and asking critical questions. And the minute we do that, I think the whole point of innovation is lost.
Yes.
It's to help us be better humans, not less human. So certainly, the more we can use our critical thinking skills, absolutely the better, for sure.
Yeah.
So Bettina, you end your chapter by prescribing several steps that innovators can take to prevent slipping over to the dark side. Tell us more about these steps. How can we prevent this slip? What does that look like inside of organizations?
Yeah, well, I think it is. It's almost employing a devil's advocate. It's probably the one way of how you can prevent a lot of these things. It's just questioning and challenging. Do we really need this product? Why are we doing this? Why do we want this? And to challenge, what if it fell into the wrong hands? What's the worst that this product can do? Say what's the nastiest use of what we are trying to bring to market? how, I know we are doing it with the best intentions, and there are those who don't have the best intentions. So I think it really so much is about not getting too excited about what is possible and pursuing it for just that reason.
Mm-hmm.
But also, well, the one question is on what would the worst use look like, and then the other one is, is it feeding our bottom line, or is it also contributing to society and in the environment in equal measures? And so I think in one way, a very, not quite sure whether it's simple or simplistic, but one way to avoid the dark side of innovation is to ask, does whatever we are innovating, does it satisfy all three aspects of the triple bottom line?
Right, right. So yeah, it certainly sounds like there's a whole new set of questions that we need to be critiquing our strategy and our business with, a new set of questions we need to be asking inside of organizations about these innovations. Are they truly necessary? What are the implications? How can they be used? What could go wrong? And thinking, like you said, in terms of the triple bottom line, are we properly affecting those? So I think that is for certain the things that organizations need to be doing to prevent this slip over to the dark side. I agree with you. So with
And
yeah,
and I think there is a, if you think about it, whether it's the B Corps, or there are a lot of movements, the reporting against the triple bottom line, so I think there is an awakening, and again, sort of, I think the pandemic has put a bit of an accelerator on the whole debate.
mhm.
And I think we need to do more and faster in this instant. When I've criticized speed before, I think this is maybe something where we really need to move a little faster if we want to give our planet a chance to survive in a state that's worth living on.
I totally agree wholeheartedly. Well, Bettina, I want to thank you for your time today. We very much appreciate your insights and your wisdom and many years of excellent wisdom that you've contributed to this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthony. My pleasure.
All right. Take care.